Hello, how are you doing? I'm glad that you have joined me in this second video on our series about church history. And today in this video, let me begin by giving you the way that I'm going to subdivide church history. We need to know that these divisions of church history are kind of artificial, allowing for a lot of overlap. These divisions are based on some major historical events that happened in those years. And from 4 BC to AD 590, that is the period of the early church history. From 4 BC, that's the time of Jesus' birth. Then in 590 AD, that's when Gregory the Great became the Bishop of Rome. Or that's when he became the Pope. Then from AD 590 to 1517, that is the period of the medieval church history. And 1517, that is the time of the Protestant Reformation. And that's the time when Martin Luther nailed his 99 theses on the castle door. And from 1517 to 1648, that's the period of the Reformation Church. In 1648, that was the end of the 30 Years' War. That was the war between Protestants and Roman Catholics. Then from 1648 to present, that's the period of the modern church history. So you need to know that these divisions are kind of artificial, allowing for a lot of overlap. And these divisions of church history help us to organize church history in easily manageable segments. In Galatians chapter 4 verse 4, Paul writes, "But when the time was right, God sent forth his Son." Also Mark emphasized that the coming of Christ happened when all was made ready on earth. That is Mark chapter 1 verse 15. So consideration of the events that preceded the appearance of Christ on earth leads the sober student of history to acknowledge the truth of the statements of Paul and Mark. In most discussions of this subject, it has been forgotten that not only the Jew, but also the Greek and the Roman contributed the religious preparation for the coming of Christ. So in this video, we are going to look at the contribution of the Jews, the contribution of the Greeks, and the contribution of the Romans towards the preparation of the world for the appearance of Christ, to a point where Christ could make the maximum impact on history in a way not possible before or since the time of his birth. Now let's take a brief look at the nature of the world at the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. So at that time, there were three major civilizations in the world. There was China, India, and the Roman Empire. And in China, the major religion was Confucianism, and it was the state-sponsored religion. And in India, the major religion was Buddhism. And in the Roman Empire, it was a mixture of very many religions. There were Egyptian mystery religions, there were Persian Zoroaster gods, there was Judaism practiced by the Jews. There are also some religious cults like emperor worship. For them, any religion that they saw that could be beneficial to the empire, they could easily welcome it. Also, let me tell you about the history of Judea. At the time of Jesus' birth, Judea was not yet the province of the Roman Empire. It was not yet part of the Roman Empire. Judea at that time was ruled by King Herod, who had come to power by overthrowing the rule of the high priests, who had been rulers of Judea. King Herod's rule was so brutal and was characterized by a lot of innocent killings and heavy taxation and forced labor. King Herod was so concerned that when he dies, no one in his kingdom would mourn his death. So what he did he got one man from each family in Judea, and ordered that at the time of his death, these men should be killed, so that there will be widespread mourning all over his kingdom. And so at the time when he died in Jericho. These men were killed, and as he wanted, there was mourning in every family in Judea. So this shows you the extent of how brutal his rule was. From the start, from time we heard about him, he killed the innocent children. Then at the time of his death, he killed one man from each family in Judea. So after King Herod's death, his kingdom was divided among his 3 sons and his sister Salome, thus establishing a Herodian dynasty. Herod Antipas was one of King Herod's sons and is known for having killed John the Baptist. And Herod's grandson, Herod Agrippa, is known for having persecuted the apostles. He had apostles James killed and also imprisoned Peter. So the Jews hated the leadership of Herod and his sons. So they appealed to Rome to make Judea one of the provinces of the Roman Empire. So Caesar Augustus, who was the Roman emperor at that time, he assigned a Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, to rule Judea on behalf of the emperor. So that's how Judea became part of the Roman Empire. And so now let's look at the political contribution of the Romans. Contribution number 1, the Romans created peace. The Romans called it Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace. So free movement about the Mediterranean world would have been most difficult for the messengers of the gospel before the reign of Caesar Augustus. The division of the ancient world into small jealous tribes hindered the travel and spread of ideas. So with the extension of the Roman imperial power during the period of empire building, a period of peaceful development occurred in the countries surrounding the Mediterranean, and the Roman soldiers kept peace on the roads of Asia, Africa, and Europe. The Romans also developed an excellent system of roads. These main roads were built to serve for ages. These roads went straight over the hills and the valleys to the farthest points of the empire. A study of the journeys of Paul indicates that he made great use of the excellent road system to get from one strategic center to another strategic center of the Roman Empire. So the Roman roads and the strategic cities located on these roads were of great advantage to the realization of Paul's mission. Another contribution of the Romans was the Roman army. The Roman army also aided in the spread of Christianity. Some of the soldiers who had been converted to Christianity spread the gospel message to areas where they were assigned for military duty. It is probable that the earliest introduction of Christianity to Britain was a result of the efforts of the Christian soldiers. Also, the Roman conquest led to a loss of belief by many peoples in their gods, because the gods had not been able to keep them from the defeat by the Romans. Such people were left with a spiritual virtue that could not be satisfactorily filled by religions of the day. And in addition, the substitutes that Rome had to offer for the lost religions could do no more than make people realize their need for a more spiritual religion. So now let's look at the intellectual contribution of the Greeks. So great as the preparation by Rome for the coming of Christ was, it was overshadowed by the intellectual environment that the Greek mind provided. The history of Rome may be associated with Christianity's political environment, but it was Athens that helped provide an intellectual environment that aided in the propagation of the gospel. The Greeks were conquered by the Romans and were ruled by the Romans. But it should be noted that the Greeks produced people with the greatest minds in history. People like Socrates, people like Plato, people like Aristotle, people like Pythagoras. You also need to know that it's the Greeks that invented mathematics, the calculus. So what are the contributions of the Greeks? Number one, the Greeks provided a universal language. Just as English has become the universal language today, Greek was also the universal language during the time of the early church. Every Roman citizen at that time could speak and easily understand Greek. So that on the day of Pentecost, Peter preached to all the thousands of people that had gathered in Greek, and they were all able to understand his message. In the ancient Roman Empire, Greek was the language of the common people, and Latin was the language of the high-class people. But most of the citizens could easily speak both Greek and Latin. Even the books of the New Testament were written in Greek. Later in the Middle Ages, Latin became the universal language. Also, something to note here is that the Roman governor Pontius Pilate required the words, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews," to be written on the cross of Jesus in 3 languages. That is in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. And these 3 languages represented the 3 worlds in which the early Christians first carried the gospel message. So the Greek also contributed by providing the Greek philosophy. So Greek philosophy prepared for the coming of Christ by destroying the old religions. Whoever came to know the contents in Greek philosophy so soon found that this intellectual discipline made his pluralistic religion so rational and unintangible that he turned away from it to philosophy. But philosophy also failed to satisfy his spiritual needs. So he either became a skeptic or sought comfort in the mystery religions of the empire. Now let's look at the contribution of the Jews, the preparation of the world for the coming of Christ. So religious contributions to the fullness of time include those of the Greeks, the Romans, as well as those of the Jews. But however great may have been the contribution of the Greeks and the Romans to Christianity by way of the environment, the contribution of the Jew stands forth as the heredity of Christianity. Christianity may have developed in the political environment created by Rome, and may have had to face the intellectual environment created by the Greek mind. But its relationship to Judaism is much more intimate. Judaism may be thought of as the stock from which the rose of Christianity was to bloom. Judaism also provided the heredity of Christianity, and for a time even gave the infant religion shelter. So the Jews helped to introduce the system of monotheism. So Judaism existed in striking contrast to the general pagan religions at that time by its emphasis on a sound spiritual monotheism. Never again, after the return from Babylonian captivity, did the Jews ever lapse back into idolatry. The message of God through Moses to them was an allegiance to one true universal God of all the earth. The gods of the pagans were merely idols to them. So this deep monotheism was spread by the numerous synagogues that were scattered throughout the Mediterranean area during the 3 centuries preceding the coming of Christ. The Jews also contributed by providing the deep messianic expectation. So the Jews offered to the world the expectation of the coming of the Messiah, who was to bring righteousness to earth. The expectation of the Messiah had been popularized in the Roman world by the proclamation by the Jews. If you want to know how deep this messianic expression was, look at Jesus' conversation with the random woman at the well. She also knew that the Messiah was coming. And the expectancy of many Christians today regarding the coming of Christ helps one to realize the atmosphere of expectancy in the Jewish world concerning the coming of the Messiah. The Jewish people also prepared for the coming of Christianity by providing the infant church with the scriptures, that is the Old Testament. Even the casual look of the New Testament will reveal how Jesus Christ also at one time read from the Old Testament. And also reading the episodes of the apostles, we see them quoting several times in the Old Testament. So these scriptures we are seen as God's word to man. So the matters that have been discussed show how favored Christianity was, both as to time and region, and in a period of its emergence. At no other time in the world's history before the coming of Christ was such a large region under one law and government. The Mediterranean world also had one culture centering in Rome. One universal language made it possible to give the gospel to most of the people of the empire in a tongue common to them and common to the preacher. And Palestine, which is the birthplace of the new religion, had a strategic location in this world. Paul was right to say and emphasize that Christianity was something not done in the corner. That is in Acts chapter 26, verse 26. Because Palestine was an important crossroads linking the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe by land route. Many of the important battles of the ancient history were fought for the possession of this strategic area. So through the contribution of the Greeks, the Roman environment, and through the heritage of Judaism, the world was prepared for the right time when the Son of God would come to earth to redeem mankind. It is significant to note that of all the religions practiced in the Roman Empire at the time of Christ's birth, only Judaism and Christianity have been successful in surviving the changing course of human history. Isn't that amazing? So this has been it for this video. See you in the next video when we shall look at the Apostolic Church. May God be with you.